I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. Before we get to this edition of the show, I just want to promote Wall Street Window, a website maintained by Mike Swanson that provides valuable insights on both financial markets and geopolitics. It's been around since 2003, and its slogan is "Be in the Know," and I highly recommend it as daily reading. So go on over to wallstreetwindow.com and keep yourself informed. This edition of Parallax Views is brought to you by the $10 and above tier supporters of Parallax Views on Patreon. So, with that in mind, producers credit shoutouts to Gunnar, Mark, Alexander, Catherine, Tilo, Emilia, Jeff, John, Bert, Brian, Elliot, Michael, Brace, James, Nick, Mersham, Galen, Arlen, Bo, Christopher, Michael, Gigadelic Media, Chance, Chase, Dan, David H., Y. Kellerman, Saaded 13, Kathleen, David, Ava, Bob, The West Bank Robbery Podcast, Jamie, Enoch, Gary, Max, Ishtofer, James, Martin, Matthew Ho, Brian, Nobody, Thomas, and Dano. And now on to the show. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. On this edition of the program, we're joined by a very special guest, Palestinian American children's books author, Rifk Ebeid. In books like You Are the Keller, Birthday Kunafa, and Baba, What Does My Name Mean? A Journey to Palestine, as well as its accompanying animated short film, I Am From Palestine. Rifk seeks to give Palestinian children a better sense of their own identity and rich cultural heritage. We'll be discussing a number of Rifk's books, as well as her own journey as a Palestinian American. And we'll even discuss how one of her books faced censorship at a Philadelphia library. All that and more on this edition of Parallax Views. Welcome to Parallax Views, a guest that I'm very happy to be speaking with, and I'm glad she could take it out some time to speak with me. She's a Palestinian American children's author, Rifk Ebeid, and I really want to thank her because I know this is a very, to put it mildly, overwhelming time for a lot of Palestinian voices. So the fact that she's willing to take some time out to speak means a lot. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
So if you could, I want to talk about your children's book, Baba, What Does My Name Mean? And also the animated short that comes with it, I Am From Palestine. But maybe first you could talk about your background as a Palestinian American and also how you decided to start writing children's books.
Oh gosh, I don't even know where to start with that. So I grew up in a small town in Florida. We were one of maybe 2 or 3 Palestinian families that were here. And I was the only Palestinian in my school. And I've been told that I've been an activist from preschool, basically. Been talking about this since preschool. And I don't know. It's a part of who I am. Like, I don't know what I would be outside of this. And that's what kind of guided my trajectory as far as my education and my career path. And so my career path was, I started out in political science and Arabic, and then I studied human rights, and then I went to law school. And after law school, so that whole trajectory was based on wanting to fight for Palestine. And after law school, I was super burnt out, and I realized that, I could still study something that I guess would be a non-traditional activist type of role that would be okay. I wouldn't be giving up on my people. So I actually pivoted to speech language pathology, which is still kind of related, because it's all, I feel like the thing that ties it all together is this idea of us having a voice and being able to communicate, and having that right to communicate and tell our stories and talk about who we are, and just educate the world. And so that was kind of my what kind of led me to the children's books, is because when I was in the real world, after being a student activist for so long, I realized that the traditional activist role wasn't necessarily for me. And, but I still wanted to do something that would have a long-lasting impact. And Palestinian history, we have a deep history in literature, and very prolific writers that were even targeted for their words and assassinated. And so I noticed in the US, we didn't actually have children's books about Palestine. And I know from my own experience growing up, I was just reading, adult level books from a young age. And I was pregnant and gonna have my first child. And so that kind of pushed me to really write my first story. And I named my kids after different cities in Palestine. And that's kind of where the title came from, because for Baba, what does my name mean? Because I knew one day they would ask, and that we would, be able to explain it to them.
So the animated film, I Am From Palestine, that's based on Baba, What Does My Name Mean, right?
Yes. Yeah. So
Okay.
what happened was, I did Baba, What Does My Name Mean? And then when I was going to release it, it was released in 2020, right when COVID started, actually. So when I was going to release it, I was just going to make like this basic trailer on like iMovie and use some images from the book. And my friend, who is a director and a filmmaker, she's like, oh my God, no, you should make this like an animated trailer. What are you thinking? Your illustrator is also an animator. And I was like, oh my God, I never thought of that. And so that's kind of how we made this really, really basic animated trailer. But what happened is it really blew up, because we saw that people were desperately wanting this type of content, like to see themselves heard and seen in this type of medium. And that's where the full animation came into play, because we saw how popular the trailer was, and we wanted to make it something bigger that children could really benefit from.
So I Am From Palestine and Baba, What Does My Name Mean? Both tell the story of a young girl that is just starting school, and they're celebrating diversity in her class, but she can't find Palestine on the map. So she doesn't feel like she can express her sense of identity. And that's when her father tells her this story. I'm curious, I've talked to other Palestinian Americans about this book, and one of them said, oh yeah, that actually happened to me in school once. Can you talk about the difficulties that maybe a Palestinian American child has about their identity, just because of the way things are set up here, the way we teach history, and the way we celebrate diversity? Because I feel like there's almost a Palestine exception at times when we celebrate diversity.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I knew when we wrote this story, so the story is based off the book, but it's not exactly like the book, because we wanted to make a story that was, universal that everyone could relate to, or that Palestinians could relate to. Because I'll be honest, for me, my writing and my books, my main target audience is Palestinian children and the Palestinian community, because we've been silenced and censored for so long. And I just want for us to see ourselves expressed from an authentic, lens. And so that's who I was thinking of when I made the story. And it's crazy because as we were animating it, people were putting posts at random throughout the couple of years about those similar experiences that they had or that their children were having in school. And everyone that I know has that first moment where they realized that their identity was going to be questioned or denied or negated or silenced. And so it's a story. I've had adults even tell me, like, they watched the film and it really hit them, because we've all been through that experience. I myself, went through that my entire life. I mean, like I said, small town in Florida. In general, they don't even know what Palestine is, but it's funny because if you say I'm Palestinian from Palestine, a usual reaction that you'll get is, oh, I want to go to Israel. And so they're able to make that connection. But if you just tell them I'm from Palestine, they're like, oh, I've never heard of that. I don't know where that is. And they're not being sarcastic, they're being genuine. But it's a weird cognitive dissonance growing up. So for us, it was really important to tell this story because we want to make a point that we are from Palestine, and we want our kids to have the confidence to be able to say that, because it is very hard to be in that position when you're a child and you're faced with, your teacher who's like a position of authority who may negate that for you, or the kids around you. At that age, it's really uncomfortable. And so you don't want to do anything that goes against the grain. And for us as Palestinians, it's often perceived as like aggressive to even say we're Palestinian. So I really just wanted kids to watch this and to understand that if you know where you come from and you know your history, and that was the point of my book too, because the book is like a tour throughout Palestine. If you understand that, you have this foundation inside of you, this confidence that can let you take on the inevitable denial of who you are.
Can you speak more towards that? Like, for people that are non-Palestinian, why is this sense of identity so important? And also, why has it been, denied? And maybe we could talk a little bit about the importance of, it's very important to you to identify as Palestinian. Let's talk about that.
I feel like identity in general, it becomes really important for people when you feel like it's being taken away. And so if we see decades upon decades of our land and our land being taken and our people being killed or displaced, and then I'm living in a country that completely rejects that that's even happening, we have to cling to who we are as Palestinians and really assert our unique identity as Palestinians within the broader Arab world, because it's being erased and denied, and because our voices are being silenced and censored. So we have a responsibility, because it's literally our existence that's trying to be decimated. So we don't have a choice in the matter. It's something that's just inherent within us. Like I said, since preschool, I was talking about it because that's all I heard, growing up, is I know what's happening to us. And as a kid, kids understand this concept of fairness and unfairness. It's very simple. And so it's just something that's just inherent inside of us, that we have to be proud of being Palestinian, but not just for the sake of being Palestinian. It's proud of it because we know we descend from a thousands of year old culture that's being erased, or trying to be erased, and they're unable to erase us.
In regards to this animated short and the other writings you're doing, I mean, they're not, you're not tackling this subject necessarily from, I guess, a hyper political viewpoint. So I wanted you to talk about how you went about telling these stories without being deeply political. I mean, I guess some people would argue, oh, it's inherently political, and I get that too. But you sort of take a different approach than a lot of other writing on the topic. So can you speak to how you took that approach and how you tried to tell the story without necessarily being, getting into the deep dig of the politics? Hope that question makes sense.
No, it does. It's interesting. Our identity is politicized, but we are literally just telling our stories and our experience. And the people trying to complicate it and politicize it and make it this unexplainable or not understandable thing that's like thousands of years old is just inaccurate. So when I tell my stories, I'm literally telling our history and our stories that are passed down from our families, and my experience personally from being able to travel to Palestine growing up in the summers, and just what I saw, what I felt. And so as living as a Palestinian, everything in a way is political for us, but also we're just living our lives and being who we are. And so that comes out in our stories. And for me personally, because I had focused all my education on Palestine, I was used to writing research papers and being very, factual and historical and putting all those details and that was the hard part for me when I was writing the children's book, because like you said, I feel like I was still political in my books, but I guess it's kind of laced in there, and that's kind of how it is with us. Just our lived experience. It's just something laced within who we are. So what I was trying to do with the first book was still include that element. So we know that she's a refugee. We know that she needs to educate people about her country, and that's what's gonna free us. But it's more focused on Palestine and what Palestine was before Zionism and what Palestine will be after Zionism. So we don't center our entire existence around Zionism, which has politicized us. Our existence is beyond that. And that's kind of what I like to center in my stories.
With regards to what I said earlier about identity, I think that does get missed in these discussions. So what I mean is, I'm not undermining anything happening in Gaza or the West Bank right now. I mean, that's on a different level. But I think just for Palestinian Americans, or any Palestinian in the diaspora, I think it's very difficult because there's something traumatic about being told that your narratives and your stories and your identity doesn't count, or that it's inherently anti-Semitic, or that it's inherently hateful. Can you speak to I think there is a trauma connected to that. I don't know if you want to speak to that, but.
Yeah, I think growing up, I didn't realize it because that was just the norm. It was what was expected. Like I knew that I had to face that. So you don't have time to think about it growing up, like how it feels personally. Yeah, it's frustrating. And it's frustrating when you experience it from all angles, even from perceived allies. But I think now as an adult and with social media, now when I see like mainstream media, I can feel in my body like getting tense. And I realize like, oh my God, this is bringing up really bad feelings of what I used to feel as a kid. Because I'm really grateful now that, social media has all kinds of problems that we can talk about, but I'm very grateful that it did allow this exposure firsthand of what is happening that was filtered before. So for my parents' generation and for my generation, we could only rely on newspapers and on mainstream media. And it was really, really frustrating. Like it's like when you literally see the truth, but it's just nobody else can see it. They're forbidden from seeing it. And then they don't believe you because they can't see the actual images and the way it's framed and contextualized or decontextualized. So yeah, there is, I don't know if I would say trauma. I feel bad using that word because I feel like whatever we experience here is nothing, like you said, compared to what Palestinians are experiencing under Israeli occupation. But yeah, there's a level of that I didn't notice growing up. And so now when I see the conversation has shifted so drastically from when I was a student activist, I do kind of wish that I was maybe born at this time so that I feel like this is what I was craving as a student and as a child. I was craving this kind of understanding and people seeing what's really happening.
If you could, and I hope this isn't too personal of a question, but do you have any memories of when you first learned about, say, the Nakba or the catastrophe of 1948? And what's the experience like for someone in the diaspora that is learning about this for the first time?
So the Nakba specifically, for my family's experience, where they were able to remain in Palestine. So my family lives in Jerusalem. So the major experience that they had was in 1967, which is called the Naksa. And that is when Israeli soldiers did come to my mom's house. She was around 12 at the time, I think. And she told me they lined them up at gunpoint and told my grandfather, "You guys got to go, get out." And he said, "No, you can shoot all of us. We're not leaving." And she just recounts like the fear that they felt that day. And luckily they didn't get shot. They were okay. But their neighbor actually got shot. And my mom remembers seeing the side of her face got kind of blown off and they could only just wrap it back on. So those are the stories that I was told for our family. But I remember the thing that really, I guess, really lit the fire inside of me. Like I said, I've been talking about it since I was little, but the thing that really got me was in high school as a senior, we had to write this extended essay and we could choose whatever topic we wanted. And I had this feeling inside of me, like I need to understand Palestine better. I can't just be proud of being Palestinian. I need to go deeper. So I wrote about the first Intifada. And that's really what ignited my trajectory after that. It changed my life, seeing the images and just knowing more than what you're told or what you've seen, more than beyond the news, just reading. So I really encourage people, and this is what I try and the message that I try and include in the book is I really encourage education of the self first and then of others. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it does. I totally get that. When it comes to, well, I'll put it this way. I had a friend that actually shared on social media the animated short, I Am From Palestine. And most of the reactions were good. But then I saw this really horrendous, reaction to it. They got really angry and were just going off about, oh, this is that Islamic propaganda, or this is that. Yeah. I mean, it's weird because I always tell people, there are such things as Christian Palestinians, Palestinian Christians, but they were going off saying this is propaganda. Why do they hate Jewish people? And I'm thinking to myself, there's no hatred in this animated short. And I just wanted you to talk about, what do you think can you talk about the misunderstandings that people have about Palestinians and their identity?
Yeah, I've seen those comments. Usually they write like this entire thesis statement, and I'm like, go to college and write it there. Like, write it for your professor. Don't leave it on the YouTube comment. Um, so like I said, our film centers the Palestinian narrative and the Palestinian experience. Our lives don't revolve around them. And it is impacted by what's happening to us, but our identity and our experience is ours. And I'm not sure that I care if it offends somebody else. And I've been asked that about my book as well. My second book, called You Are the Color, is about the Nakba. And I was asked, like, what do you think a Jewish kid would feel if they had to read your story? And it's like, why are you singling out a Jewish kid? How would any kid feel if they had to read a story of a child who experienced being expelled from his home? And so that's kind of, I try and bring it back to the point of the story, which is the Palestinian experience. And I have been told that as well about Baba, what does my name mean? Because it doesn't include any Jewish holy sites or any mention of Jews or whatever. And it's like, I don't have to mention you because I'm talking about Palestine. And Palestine, for me, before Zionism, was a country of all its people, regardless of religion. And so that's kind of, I just recenter the narrative. They keep trying to make it about them. And I find it similar to the debates going on about what kind of books we can have in this, like the books that are getting banned, and it's about race. And it's always a question of, oh, well, how will the white students feel? And you're antagonizing the white students. Like, no, if white students feel bad for what they're reading, that's okay, because they're reading about something that actually happened, somebody's actual experience. You feeling bad is not an attack on you. It's your conscience working based on what you're being exposed to. So yeah, that's what I always try and recenter the narrative, because they have had plenty of platforms to, espouse their views, and we should have that ability as well.
In regards to everything that is happening now, you mentioned the protests, and there's a lot of voices getting out there. Can you talk about how that I think it's very heartening to people like yourself and others who've been speaking up for Palestinians?
Oh yeah, I'm in awe. I'm so in awe of the students. I mean, if I was as articulate as them as a student, I would be so happy. They are incredibly resilient and well informed, and they know exactly what they're standing for, and they're standing up in a moment where they need to be standing up. And I see it as an extension of decades of activism by students, like throughout the decades. And this is just the culmination. And again, like I said before, people are waking up and people are seeing the reality for what it is. And I even made a post about how proud I am of these students. My undergraduate self, who often felt very alone, I feel so happy for them, and I hope that they continue to have that strength to push through all the violence that they're being exposed to because they're speaking up.
Just two more things here. I know that your book has come under fire. I guess it was at a Philadelphia library. Could you talk? What happened with this?
So with self-published books, you're kind of your one-man show. So one day I was just, Googling my book, and I came across this random article, and somebody was irate over the book. And then I saw what was happening at the library. And so what happened is a librarian at one of the branches had put up some content on their Facebook page, I think. And it included Palestinian authored books. And some Zionists, I guess, got wind of that and they weren't happy about it. So they complained, and then the library removed the content from the Facebook page. And it created a lot of problems for the librarian afterwards. And then they started having all these meetings about it and all the stuff. And it just kind of blew up from there. But yeah, they were trying to censor any mention like of Palestinian authors. So they didn't remove the books from the library, but they removed it from visibility. They just erased it, which is, again, ironic because that's what's happening to Palestinians, literally trying to be erased.
There were just two more questions I had. The first was, you've mentioned how Zionist or pro-Israel voices have been allowed to tell their narrative, but really Palestinians haven't. And one thing that I've said to people is that, I think there's a conflation that goes on where the Palestinian voice or the Palestinian grievance with Zionism is conflated with the voices of really vile anti-Semites like white nationalists and whatnot. And I think the grievances are very different. There are people that just, hate and have bigotry towards Jews. And there are people like yourself and your family and other Palestinians that were negatively impacted, to put it mildly, by the Zionist project. And I don't think I don't think a lot of people understand that there is a difference. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's a tactic being used, this conflation of Judaism with Zionism, to silence us from speaking out against what's happening to us. So for us, regardless of who was oppressing us, the focus is on the oppression and the oppressor, not what that oppressor is. They happen to be a movement that's trying to create a Jewish homeland in our country, but it's not because they are Jews that Palestinians are struggling for their freedom. It's because we're being oppressed, and we would like the oppression to stop, just like any other human being would like. And here in the US, it's dominated the mainstream for so long, this narrative, this false narrative, because it benefits them, because they want to prop up this Western-backed country in the Arab world for their own political reasons. But we've always pushed back against that. And Palestinians know what we're talking about. And I don't think anybody should fear that when talking about Palestine, because again, the whole issue is the oppression and the colonization. And it's regardless of who's doing the colonizing. It's not just a general hatred for people. It's people rising up against oppression.
Before we close out here, I know there's a few other authors now that are writing Palestinians' children's books. Ghaname, I believe, is another one. I hope I didn't mispronounce her name. But how do you feel about the fact that there is, I think, a growing movement of authors, not just amongst children's books, but just in general, that are writing about the Palestinian identity and the Palestinian experience? I mean, we just saw Netflix released a movie last year about the Nakba, Farha. I was able to interview the filmmaker behind that. So I feel like Palestinians are now being able to tell their story more. Can you speak to that? Because I think a few years ago we were in a different situation where those voices weren't weren't getting out there as much, and now we're seeing them get out more and more.
Oh yeah, I love it. I love it. Like I said, when my book came out in 2020, I chose self-publishing because I assumed nobody in the mainstream would ever publish my story as is, which includes the full map of historic Palestine as Palestine. And I didn't want my voice to be censored or highly edited or sanitized. I just wanted it to be a true, authentic story. And so now to see these authors that are getting traditionally published, and their stories not being sanitized, and them being able to tell their story as they want. It's amazing. I remember the first time I came across a Palestinian authored book. I can't explain to you how I felt. I literally felt seen. And this was not until college. And like I mentioned before, I didn't notice.
What was the book, out of curiosity? Do you happen to remember?
It was by an author called Fawaz Turki. And oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name now. He has one book called Soul in Exile. But there was this other book of his that I remember, it really struck me. I can't remember the name right now, but the author is Fawaz Turki. But I remember at the time, I realized what I had been missing on. Like I said, growing up, I didn't realize it. I just assumed no books would ever talk about us. And I didn't realize what it felt like to be seen in a book. And and it was the first time I just felt understood, like, oh my God, somebody gets it, and it's written and it's published. It's crazy. So I love that this is happening now. I'm so grateful for my children to have that. And I don't think they realize how lucky they are to have access to these kinds of stories. So I hope we keep sharing our stories, because I always tell people we're not a monolith. If you read all of our books, you'll see, yes, they may talk about similar topics in general, but the way we talk about it, the way we experience it, the way we see it, view it, it's all going to be different. So you get this more nuanced view of what it is to be Palestinian, and you see us for who we are.
And just to give you the final word here, what do you hope my listeners get out of the conversation we've been having here for the past 30, 35 minutes? And have you had any experiences of, people that may have read your book that didn't understand the Palestinian perspective before, that are understanding it now more after having been exposed to, whether it's your work or the work of other Palestinian Americans? I was curious if you could comment on those two things.
So my main takeaway is something that I mentioned before, which is the extreme importance of education. That is the foundation for everything that we do. We have to be educated and knowledgeable in order to be confident and to be able to advocate for Palestine. As far as the books, like the reaction to it, it's interesting because as vocal as I've been throughout my life, I still always have this like trepidation, like, oh, how is somebody going to react? Oh, what are they going to think if they buy this book? Oh, what if this teacher gets stressed out to read the book to the class? Stuff like that. But I found the exact opposite experience. People, again, are craving to hear directly from the people impacted. And I think that it opens people's eyes into seeing that we're all human, like everything we've been indoctrinated with from the mainstream media in the US, it's all false narratives aimed at painting certain groups in a certain way in order to promote their own political gains. And so when you read a book, especially a children's book, because it's non-threatening, you're reading a kid's book. When you read that and you get to know Palestinians and actually hear from us, it's just this human to human connection that we haven't been able to get otherwise until now.
Yeah, I was going to say, I like that you pointed out, what is less threatening than a children's book? It's completely non-threatening, and yet there's people that will froth at the mouth.
By it. Yeah. Even now, some of those books you mentioned, they're trying to like remove them from the stacks at the library. They're afraid of like kids actually getting to know Palestinians, and that's why I was telling you we're fighting this this battle of over here in the U.S. of like assuming that Palestinian is somehow aggressive or bad, or we can't talk about that, as if we're not people, And so even kids' books feel threatening to deniers of the truth. It's something they have to grapple with inside themselves. Like, why am I so offended by a children's book? And why do I feel the need to silence it?
Do you feel, and I'm sorry for keeping you over time, but do you feel there's a connection between, so I'm in Florida right now. I don't know if you said you
Oh,
were
me
from
too.
Florida.
Yeah.
Okay. I know there's a lot of like this Ron DeSantis sort of wanting to ban books about LGBTQ people and things of that nature. Do you think there is a relationship there between Palestinians and other people having their voices sort of silenced by this, right-wing movement in America?
I think oppression in all its forms, like everybody who experiences oppression, we're all connected in some way. We're all connected by this oppressive force. And in Florida, like I, as a parent, if I put myself, in my role as a parent, I understand this fear of our kids being exposed to things that maybe we don't agree with, or maybe things that we don't want them to be exposed to from somebody else. We want to expose them to it. I get that. But at the same time, the kids are going to be exposed in some way, shape, or form at some point in their life. So you banning books is not going to protect them from that. It's actually doing our kids a disservice, because once you introduce these topics, you do give the parent the opportunity to talk about it more with the kids and let them know like what our perspective is as a family, and just open up that subject. But just the idea of just completely banning it as if that's going to prevent the kids from ever being exposed to it is ridiculous. We just can't do that, as much as some people would want to. You can't. It's like a simple parenting thing. Like, you can't shelter them. They're going to be exposed. And so I don't know what his like end goal is. Or I don't think he has an end goal. I just think it's just for the sake of pretending to be strong, like hard on these issues.
So how can my listeners keep up with your work? Maybe you can give them your website. If you're on any of the social media sites, my listeners always like to know that at the end.
Okay, yes. My Instagram is my name. So it's at Rifk Ebeid, RifkEbeid. And then my website is rifkbooks.com. So RifkBooks.com. I have 3 children's books out right now. The last one that I just released was in, I think, February, and it's actually a wordless picture book. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but
no, what tell me more.
So picture books without words. So basically the reader is the storyteller. And coming from a speech pathology perspective, we use this a lot in our work because it creates so many language opportunities for children, and it can work for a whole range of ages and a whole range of skill sets. And as an Arab, we have this long tradition of storytelling. So I really wanted our kids to get into this idea of being able to tell the story on their own. And you see them kind of struggle with it in the beginning, but then the more they look through the pictures and notice the details and think about the characters, the story can expand and change. So this last one is called Birthday Kunafa. And kunafa is a famous treat, a sweet that we have that was originated in the city of Nablus in Palestine. And it's about a little girl who lives in Jerusalem, a Palestinian girl who just wanted a slice of birthday kunafa for her birthday, but the best place in town was in a different city. And you kind of go with her through the obstacles she has to face, like checkpoints, to get to her birthday kunafa. And then I have one more book coming out soon. Hopefully, it's currently being illustrated, that I'm very excited about as well. So I'll have 4 total that I really hope parents and educators and anyone can use as a tool to help teach Palestine. That's my main goal with the film and with the books, is just giving you tools to help teach Palestine and just make it easier.
And they can watch the animated film I'm from Palestine on YouTube. And I think if they just go to the YouTube page for that, they'll be able to link to your website through that.
Yes. And our film actually just hit 1 million views on YouTube, which we are very proud of because, like I said, it means people are listening, people are hearing our stories, and it's, worldwide, and the conversation is shifting. And I do believe we will see a free Palestine soon.
Thank you so much for making time to come on Parallax Views. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that does it for this edition of Parallax Views. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and that you'll consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. And with that being said, until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.